Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I haven't figured out the exact title of this video yet. You probably have, because you saw it, or it's on autoplay, or any of those things, but the reason I haven't figured out the exact title is because this video is a video of me complaining and yet not complaining. More specifically, the not complaining aspect, but it's an interesting conversation that I think a lot of people who do content creation in board games will resonate with, and those of you who don't might just find it an interesting conversation. Honestly, I don't know. I don't really know how this does, but to be very, very clear, it's not me complaining. And the reason I haven't figured out the title is because I don't want it to be dramatic or just controversial. I want it to be accurate, but an accurate title would likely be a little bit more boring, because a strictly speaking accurate title would be 5 ways that content creation has slightly negatively impacted small minor aspects of the hobby for me while still overall being a good thing. That would be the title of this video, something along those lines. I have to figure out how to convey that. I'll film the video and then we'll figure that part out later. But in any case, that's what this is. This is 5 ways that content creation has slightly negatively affected my impact on the hobby while still overall being a good thing. A tremendous thing. I'm incredibly grateful. I've said this many, many times. I absolutely love, like beyond love, the fact that I am doing this. The fact that I am able to look at what's happening right now and genuinely see a pathway to full-time spending my life playing board games. And so when I focus on 5 ways that it has slightly negatively impacted my life, you need to be mindful of, compared to a regular day job, this is absolutely amazing. I still have a regular day job, but hypothetically, this is absolutely amazing. And so again, there's no complaining here. I think I spent enough time telling you I'm not complaining. So with that context in mind, let's go ahead and go into those 5 things. As usual, timestamps down below. And like I said, this is just aspects in which content creation does negatively impact me and the way I view board games, the way I view this hobby, while still being absolutely amazing. And if this video is, I guess, if people watch it enough and it's an interesting enough video, then maybe I'll do another video of 5 ways that content creation has been absolutely amazing. I'll probably make it 10 ways because there's more than 5 ways. But in any case, these games have nothing to do with the video, by the way, at all. The games on the table, nothing to do with anything. They're just my daughter's about to film a video with me about her top 20 games of all time. By the way, if or when I do a video of 5 ways or 10 ways or whatever ways that content creation has improved my life, doing fun things like this with my family, absolutely on the list. So again, grains of salt left, right, and center, but that's really, really way too much time babbling around. Starting off with being too wrapped up in what my ratings mean. So, a long time ago, I rated board games. Before I did anything to do with content creation, I had my own little board, and I'd rate games, and games would be either 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 on my list. I had no 1s. I had 5, 4, 3s, and 2s, and then I had games that left my collection. In my personal board, when I'm done with a game, when it leaves my collection, it just goes away. So a game can be a 3 or a 4 or whatnot, but it's in my left my collection category, because I just have different categories. My 5s, my 4s, my 3s, my 2s, and then the games that I don't own. I didn't own any 1s, and so there was no category for 1s. It was simple, it was easy, I played a game, I threw it in a category, I called it a day, and I moved on with my life. I moved those categories around as I wanted to, and I didn't really care because it just was my own personal rating. I didn't get wrapped up in what my ratings mean and how I have to be mindful of this rating versus that. It didn't matter at all. It was just my opinion of a game. No one was questioning it. No one was looking at it. Occasionally I had conversations with my own game group, my own relationships with my friends, my family, my people I play games with about those games. I'd be like, oh yeah, this is a 5 out of 5 for me. This is an absolutely amazing game. I had conversations with one of my friends about how he only has 3s, 2s, and 1s. He's much more specific in the way he looks at games. He looks at games as amazing, good, or not worth it at all. He just has 3 binary ratings, which arguably could be a good system as well. Again, his system is, I love it, I like it, I don't want to play it. That's his rating. But we had these conversations, we did these things, and no one ever cared. Except for us, because we're geeks and we like board games, and we discuss these things because we like board games. And being a content creator who reviews games, I have spent so much time agonizing over ratings. I'm sure you've seen many of the videos, depending on who you are. This might be your first video on the channel, in which case, welcome aboard. This whole rambling thing, part of the conversation. Fun fact, I had a little newsletter I did a while ago. If you look at my blog over on Board Game Geek, it's actually called, is it called The 3-Minute Ramble? Or it was called The 3-Minute Ramble, I may have changed it. But I had a newsletter at one point called the 3-Minute Ramble, because this is what I do. I ramble. I just wander from point to point to point, occasionally connecting dots, but at least adding timestamps so that you can kind of have a little bit more accessibility there. But yeah, I didn't care about this stuff. I just rated games. But now I focus on those ratings. Now I agonize over those ratings. Now I change my rating systems. I one point started with like a 10-point scale. I moved back to a 5-point scale. Now I have a 0.5 scale. Fun fact, I've actually adopted the 0.5 scale for my own personal ratings just because I actually found that I do like that additional level of nuance. It's grown on me, reluctantly, but it has grown on me. But now I question. Now I wonder. Now I sit there and get in my own head about what ratings mean, how I have to compare one to another, and how it has to factor in. A great example is going to be one of my most controversial ratings of all time, which is going to be the Lords of Ragnarok rating I gave, where I sat there for 20 minutes and critiqued the Lords of Ragnarok and all the aspects of it I didn't like, and then gave it a 5 out of 5, and that threw people off. How could you dislike it this much and give it a 5 out of 5? And it's reasonable. It's completely reasonable. But I got in my own head, and the context there, and I said this in a follow-up video already, I talked about it. But in my head, I gave Lords of Hellas a 5 out of 5, and Lords of Ragnarok I prefer to Lords of Hellas, so in my head I was like, well, I can't give it less than a 5, because I prefer this to that, and so it has to be a 5. If that's a 5, that makes sense. But yes, it's a prototype, so I still have critiques and things I want to see changed, so the rating was a combination that the gameplay I preferred to Lords of Hellas, which I gave a 5 out of 5, and then the fact that the critiques were mostly things I kind of expected them to be dealt with along the way, so it was like, in my head, a 5 versus a 5, but technically it should have been provisional, a 5 versus a 5. You see what I'm going with here. Being a content creator has messed with my ability to just assign a number and not care what anyone else thinks because it doesn't matter. I think about these things. I wonder, I question, I put time and effort into the number I give a game and what that means. I really like this game despite its faults, but does that mean it should go down a notch? Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. And so to one extent, in my ratings down below, I actually have, in all my reviews, I have a little tag of what each number means, and I stick by those numbers. They mean that to me, and that's fine, but then I wonder, I'm not explaining those numbers to every single person every single time. I tried that once upon a time and it didn't work. People didn't like the fact that I was constantly repeating myself, and so I gave up saying that, and I just hope people look at the description. But what if they don't? And now that 3.5, people might view it the way it's a 3. But what about the fact that this is a lighter game? And I like the lighter game. I like it more than the heavier game, but what does that mean? And this heavier game, I go harder on heavier games. That's going to be a video on its own right. I do plan on doing a video on why I am harsher and meaner towards a heavier game. If you take more of my time and effort and energy, then I'll give you a lower rating because you gave me a higher barrier to entry. Think of it like buying a toaster on Amazon. A $400 toaster has to outperform the $30 toaster. I'll give a $30 toaster a 4.5 on Amazon, no problem, not ruinous at all. It's just, it does the job, it's good, it's all fine. But a $400 toaster, you have to be significantly better to get that same 4.5, and that's how I view heavier games and lighter games. Now that I think about it, by the way, that's a great analogy for when I actually do that video. I'm specifically talking faster than usual, and I talk fast in general, to go through the mindsets I get locked into. All these things. The fact that I gave Merchants of the Dark Road a 3.5, and then I turn around and I'll give some lighter game. What's here? Adventures of Robin Hood, which I gave a 3 originally, but I've actually bumped it up since then. Adventures of Robin Hood is a 3.5. As is Merchants of the Dark Road. Does that make sense to me? I think Merchants of the Dark Road is a significantly better, more notable achievement, but it also asked more from me. It asked more from me. It asked me to learn rules. It asked to take up a slot at game night. It was a heavier game. I had more issues with the balance of it, and I give them both a 3.5. I feel like I have to explain that every single time. I never had to explain this stuff to people before. And so my ratings, which are still my ratings, and I'm still going to do them, but I'm more wrapped up in what my ratings mean. I'm more wrapped up in the presentation they have and the fact that I have to be mentally cognizant that I might have to explain that rating to someone else. The amount of flack Tom Vassell got when he gave Arc Nova a 10 out of 10, but he also had a critique at one point, and so he's like, well, how could you critique this, that, and the other and give it a 10 out of 10? Especially when he does give 10 out of 10s very rarely, very infrequently. These are all things. You're put under the public eye, so to speak, and it means things that didn't have to mean anything before suddenly mean something now. And that's probably true for a lot of other aspects. I'm talking specifically within the realm of board games, meaning in all contexts I could have put on this list just being in the public eye, having my sentences that normally, if you're having a conversation with a friend, you can say something and then correct it a second later, or whenever it's brought up again. But if I say something and I screw up, it's on video, it's locked in, and then I have to sit there and hope that someone read the comment that I put in another video explaining it, or even the comment in this video, 14,000 comments below. I wish I was that popular, I'm not that popular. But either way, number one, which has taken way too long to get here, being too wrapped up in what my ratings mean. Taking too long to finish, technically. That's what I mean. I say something's wrong and it's locked in. You can't change it. Buzzer pressed. Number two, selling games is harder. Okay, selling my board games is harder, to the point that I'm going to tell you a little secret. I have a fake profile in which I sell games under. Okay, I've created a fake profile just for that purpose. So basically, I sell board games on a regular basis, and I'll explain the whole fake thing in a second. We'll get to that shortly. But I sell board games on a regular basis. If a game's not for me, it goes into my games leaving the collection video, and then I turn around and sell it. I'll put it on Facebook Marketplace, and usually Board Game Exchange, a Facebook group. I put a video about this, of covering that, and I just sell the games that are not for me. And that's fine. That is what it is. I sell games that are not for me. I trade them, I sell them, I do whatever. I rotate the games in my collection. And I used to always do that. But now it's slightly harder. Now when I sit there and I say, hey, by the way, you know that Bloodborne all-in pledge I got that I'm not keeping? I'm selling it. And I go online and I sell it in a Facebook group. I'm no longer Joe Schmo selling a game that no one cares about. Especially, by the way, if I'm asking the going market price, which I always will. And then suddenly I could be perceived as a scalper. You know, oh, you look at you selling your Bloodborne pledge for $850. Rip off. You bought it for $450. Sure, I did, but the going rate is $850, and so I'm going to sell for $850. But now I'm in my head. Because now it's like, I don't want to have to justify that. I don't want to have to explain to people that the market is the market. I mean, if you watch my channel, you probably know how I view these things, but maybe you don't, and suddenly there's all these different conversations. And I mentally project outwards. What if I viewed insert content creator's name here doing the same thing, selling their own Bloodborne pledge for $850? And I think I'd probably look at it like, oh yeah, you know, Tom Vassell, Rado, whoever is selling a shut up and sit down. They're selling their Bloodborne pledge for $850. That's a little iffy. And so it's slightly harder for me to do it. I still do, but it's slightly harder for me to do that without being worried about the optics of it. I'm not raking it in, just the opposite. I'm going to be like, hopefully, if or when I leave my day job to do content creation, I'll be taking a massive pay cut. And the reason I've been pushing this off is because I need to actually make money to, pay the bills and all that stuff. So I don't think of myself as a horrible human being, but I do wonder about the optics of it. I do wonder about the optics of a public figure in the board game space selling a game at market price, but twice what they paid for it. It's definitely a concern over there. And then secondly, and this is another aspect to it, very often I have games that I'm selling that weren't in my games leaving the collection videos. Always for a reason that makes sense, that does not involve me getting rid of a game. So just to give you one example, I'll give you a specific example of what I mean, and this applies on a somewhat regular basis. But for example, at one point I traded games with somebody else, and he gave me an extra copy of Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. It was a local trade, and the guy threw in Ares Expedition as part of the trade. Fine, no big deal. But then I was getting rid of Ares Expedition because I didn't want the Ares Expedition. It was just thrown in, and so I was getting rid of Ares Expedition. But if I publicly sell it online, then I'll get questions or eyeballs, or potentially, maybe I'm just getting my own head, possibly, but who knows. For the record, when I did sell Bloodborne online and I sold it, whatever, in a Facebook Marketplace, I got way more comments and questions and things from people than I usually do. So it's not purely my own head. It definitely does attract attention in some small way. But so this copy of Ares Expedition, I didn't want it to be showing up in me publicly selling my game online, and then have people being like, oh, you're getting rid of Ares Expedition? Why wasn't it in your games leaving the collection video? And the answer is because I'm not getting rid of it. I'm not. Or Wild Descent. Wild Descent is a great example. Wild Descent is a game that I backed, but then the publisher sent me a pre-production copy, a pre-air freighted copy, and so I ended up with 2 copies, which meant I was selling a copy. But I didn't want people to be like, you're selling a copy of Wild Descent? I thought you loved that game. I do love that game, but it was an extra copy. And so there's all these conversations around, okay, great, how do I get rid of games that I want to sell that I'm not actually getting rid of, and I don't want to spark a whole conversation and an explanation around it? And the short answer is I gave up and created a fake profile for when I'm selling games that aren't technically leaving my collection. Any game that's leaving my collection, by the way, I still just sell on the main profile. I deal with the eyeballs, I deal with whatever. It's a balance. But games that are not really mine, I have a little side profile that is totally fake profile that I've sold games through. If you're one of the handful of people that watch this video and made it this far in this video and are on Facebook Marketplaces, maybe one day you'll spot who I am. But that's basically that. Being a content creator has made selling games publicly a bit harder. Number 3, and if you're wondering where the games have gone, why I have a coffee, and why various other details may have changed, is because this video, the one you're watching now, was actually filmed, well, weeks ago, and I didn't particularly like my number 3. It was very short, it was a little, just all over the place, and I decided to do a new number 3 instead. So, new Alex is here, current Alex, although by the time you watch this, current Alex is past Alex, and then by then we'll go back to number 4 at the end of this, so it's a little interruption and interlude, I guess. Number three. Number three is the way that sometimes being in the content creator side of things, being on the other side, involved with the industry side of things, I guess, as opposed to purely the gamer side of things, does make me more aware or cognizant of things that I don't think I need to be aware or cognizant of. And that's intentionally vague. I mean, not intentionally vague, it's just inherently vague, I think is the right term. Basically, lots of stuff happens all the time in the board game space, and ideally, most of them are board games. I mean, that is, after all, what we're here for. That is, after all, the hobby that we're engaged in. But there tends to be a lot of other side drama. A side drama that has merit for why it exists, often, has no merit as to why it exists, also often, but it's just other stuff that, for me, is much more present. For you, it may or may not be, depending on the groups you're in, depending on the issue that you're following. You may or may not get these hints of something else going on here, some drama here, some person said that there. There's all these things that go on in the board game space that aren't just about board games. And I was always aware of them to some degree, because, you know, we don't live in a vacuum, so if I see a Facebook post here, if I see that there, that's fine. But I'm more involved now. I'm more aware now. Sometimes things that aren't necessarily an issue at all become like front of mind for me because I'm in the content creator space. And if you know exactly what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's almost the point. Meaning, from your stance, from the stance of someone who's just playing board games, as I far more used to be before I started this channel, you play board games, you hear a hint of drama here and there, and you kind of ignore most stuff and you move on with your life, or you get involved to some small degree. But I get more involved in those things. Things that aren't necessarily that big a deal seem like a big deal in the heat of the moment. They seem like something that will be a huge part of this industry, and most of the time they kind of go away and roll over in a day or two. Now, the problem with talking about this without specifics is that sometimes there are genuine issues at play, that the goal of this segment right here is not to dismiss those issues. It's not to say, well, I'd just rather sit down and play board games and ignore everything else. Sometimes there's reasons to know about and engage with those other things, and in fact, the very fact that I know about them, to a certain extent, puts a degree of obligation on me to actually engage with those things. So, again, the goal here is not necessarily to say that these things shouldn't be talked about. Very often they should be. And again, sometimes they shouldn't be. It depends on, there's this weird line in the sand as to when something is unnecessary, unrelated drama, or when something is a genuine issue that needs to be talked about. And you can't really have that conversation without going through each one of those things. But the point is, and the relevance to this particular video series of, 5 things that have become worse, I guess, as far as being a content creator, is that I no longer have that choice or the knowledge. I'm involved in a whole bunch of unnecessary drama, or a whole bunch of drama, some of which is relevant, some of which is unnecessary, and it always seems front and center for a short period of time. Again, it generally isn't. Things blow over. The 24-hour news cycle is a real thing, and as whether it's important or not, unfortunately, they tend to only be talked about for a short period of time, no matter what, regardless of the importance, and then people move on. But again, it has put a very drama or other aspect kind of thing front and center in my life that wasn't always there. I think that's my number 3. Which brings us to my number 4. My number... Any minute now. Number 4 is negative reviews. A similar idea to being invested in my ratings, but a little different. I really don't like giving negative reviews. I don't like giving negative comments or critiques at all either. I do it because it's part of the job. Job's a relative term, but it's part of the job. I review games. I'm not going to call them a review. And I know lots of people take the stance of, I only review games that I am positive on. I don't take that stance mostly. For context, for those who don't know, when it comes to a retail game, I review it, period, bar none. When it comes to a prototype, a preview effectively, a game that doesn't exist yet, I don't review it if I really didn't like it. If I liked it with caveats, if I have a more of a mixed impression, I will review it, and I'll give all the negatives as to why I'm mixed. But if I really didn't like it, I say no. Basically, for context, if you're gonna get a 3 or higher, then I'll review you as a prototype. If you're getting anything, I'll review you as retail. Those are my rules there. Ideally, in a perfect world, I would just review games I like, because I don't want to give negative reviews. I don't like it. I don't like The fact that a creator, a designer, a publisher will see a video I did where I'm like, this was not a game for me. I did not enjoy X, Y, Z. I mean, I even feel bad when I give a game a 3, which a 3 is a totally fine rating. I feel there's like kind of pressure of like, but it would help them to give them a 4 or 4.5 or 5 even. Like, it would help them. But that's not what I'm signing up for. And so I don't. But I don't like it. I don't like saying, I really like this game, but I hated the art. Or I really like these aspects of the game, but I felt this, and this didn't work very well. Or it was too slow, it was too long, it was too that. I just don't like being critical. Again, I do it because it's part of the job. It's what I signed up for when I said this is a review. No disrespect to those who don't take that stance. I'm fine with whatever you want to do yourself, but I just don't like it. And I know that I owe the audience something too. That's why I do it. If it was just an issue of doing a favor to one person and not hurting others, I'd happily give every game a 5. I don't really care. But there is someone who gets hurt on the other side, which is why I don't. No matter what you do, you're hurting someone. If you're overly positive, if you make stuff up, you're hurting the audience as you lie to them. And if you're overly positive towards the creators, then... Sorry, if you're over positive to the... How does this go? I guess I kind of got lost in my train of thought there, so forget that. The basic idea is you can't make everyone happy. You're either being fair to the audience or you're being nice to the creator. You have to pick and choose. And so my answer is I'm going to go with what my opinion is. The degree of niceness I reserve is for prototypes that I really hated. That's where I'm nice. The rest of the time it is what it is, but I don't like it. I don't like saying, hey, publisher, and sometimes when smaller companies, the publisher is the creator at the same time. I don't like saying, here is, by the way, my review that I did of the game you sent me. Sorry about that. It's a little easier when I bought the game myself. When it's a game that I picked up and I'm reviewing, it's easier for sure because I'm aware of the fact that a publisher might see it, that a designer might see it, and very often they do, especially because these games go on Board Game Geek where they're tagged, and then anyone if the designer or publisher has a notification set up, they'll see it. I regularly will get comments from people that I didn't get the game from, and they'll be like, oh, thanks for the review, and then they'll put some sort of, they're usually very polite about it. Most creators, most designers I find are polite in the way that they'll say things like, oh, I'm so sorry it wasn't for you, and then they'll give a little note or feedback towards people watching. They're balancing the being respectful of my opinion while also wanting to put context there for others who see the review, and I respect that. I get that. But it makes me cringe inside. It makes me cringe inside that I did something that hurt someone else. I did something that helped the audience, for sure. I understand. Again, there's a reason I do it. I can argue both sides from today to tomorrow. Ultimately, there's a reason I do it, but it doesn't mean that I have to like it. And number five, which is almost going to be its own entire subject at some point, with a different video that I have planned, but let's focus on my side of things. It's more of a subject devoted to you in another future sense, but for right now, it's me, which is playing the wrong games. And this honestly is the easiest one. It's why I left it for 5, because it's the most obvious, it's the easiest of them all. But being a content creator means I spend time playing less ideal games. Absolutely I do. Less ideal games, left, right, and center. In a different world, a long time ago, I only played games that were well vetted by the marketplace. With the exception of Kickstarter. I did play Kickstarter games that sometimes I backed a dud, and that happened. But in retail, I didn't touch anything until it had been out for 2 years. I only played the best of the best. It didn't mean it was for me. It did not mean it was for me. Sometimes I played the best of the best and it still wasn't the game for me. But I only bothered touching games that had been out for a long time, and that meant that, but even with my Kickstarter failures or whatever, as well as the ones in retail that were loved by others but not for me, I'm looking at you, Manchester Madness and Lord of the Rings, Journeys to Middle-earth, but at the end of the day, it still meant that most of the games, a larger percentage of the games, were games that were tailor-made for me. Tailor-made is the wrong term, but well-vetted games. Nowadays, I play a lot of games that I wouldn't be doing, I wouldn't be prioritizing if not for the fact that I am a content creator. I would not be playing a lot of these games that I'm getting as review copies from publishers or Kickstarter or wherever it is. I wouldn't be in that front line having to play a lot of mediocre games. I play a lot more 3s nowadays than I ever used to before, because 3s being rating-wise, I'm saying 3 out of 5s. They're fine. They're good games. I am a firm believer that most games are good, but there's good, there's great, there's amazing, and I'm playing a lot more in the 3 category. A lot more in the, hey, here are all the reasons why this should exist, but also I prefer these other games too. Whenever I rate a game a 3, it is almost always not staying in my collection unless somebody else in my family or friend group or whatever it is wants to play that game. Even 3.5s are games that I'm happy to give up. I have a little bit more attachment to them. I think they're a decent game, but they're okay. Versus 4s and up are where it really shines for me, but I don't have as many 4s and ups as I would like. I'm not pulling, this is with me not even pulling the Dice Tower approach of just reviewing everything. I still have filters in place, but those filters are nowhere near as strong. And then even aside from that aspect, I just play a lot of games that I have to. Meaning, in the past, if I played a 3, I didn't play it again. I moved on from it. It was gone. Shoot out of my collection. Nowadays, when I play a 3, if it's a game I'm reviewing, I play it again. Now, if I really don't like a game, I'm more critical about what I am and am not willing to play a second time. I might even put out a first impressions and say, hey, I was only willing to play this one time, and it is what it is. But if I'm reviewing a game, I want to get multiple plays in, which means I often will play mediocre games a second time, and I never would have in the past. A long time ago, I put out a video, can you review a game you've only played once? And while I firmly believe the answer is yes, I believe it's better to play it more than once. I believe, and if you play it once, I usually try to give a caveat. Not usually, I always give a caveat if I've played it once, and I don't want to put out a review where I say, by the way, I've only played this game once. So it means I'm playing a lot of mediocre games. It means I'm playing a lot of games that are okay without being great. And that's okay. Again, going back to my whole point of, my life is awesome. This is not a complaining video. That's work time. My work time is playing 3s. Okay, compared to my day job, I'd rather play a whole bunch of 3s than go into work. So there's no complaining here. There's just that mindfulness, that aspect of there is always a pressure in the background to play a whole bunch of games that I wouldn't otherwise be playing. And those are 5 ways that content creation has negatively affected my hobby. Again, there's 15 or 20 or 25 or 50 reasons why it's been an absolutely amazing journey. This is not a complaining video. This is just a context. And I think most people who are in content creation, most people who are doing videos or Instagram or whatever they're doing, TikTok for board games, I think for a lot of them, they will have that general sense and understanding around these things because I imagine they go through a lot of the same struggles. Maybe not the exact same. I mean, some people don't even sell their games, so they wouldn't have that one, but I imagine there's overlap. In any case, I don't have a great way to end this one. What I will say is what I've said multiple times in this video, but I think is worth repeating. I am incredibly grateful to every single one of you. I'm incredibly grateful for the position that I'm currently in. I'm incredibly grateful that there are who knows how many people who are willing to sit through a 25-minute long video of me explaining why some aspects of my life are less ideal because of content creation and just listening to me jump all over the place and ramble. Not because I need an audience per se, but because the fact that you're here, the fact that you're willing to be here, the fact that you're watching is the only reason why I have this potential pipeline towards making this a full-time thing. And small nuances and complaints aside, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm tremendously grateful for it. So to end on that high note, that gratefulness and appreciation, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for watching all the videos, for liking, for subscribing, for Patreon if you're a patron, for anything else if you're not, everything else if you're not. And until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.